What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Capitalized Podcast. I'm Chris Casella, and as always, this episode is brought to you by our private lending company, Sharper Capital Partners. If you want to learn more about how Sharper Capital can help you build your real estate investing business, you can check us out at sharpercapital.com. I am here today with Christina Beck. Christina is an HGTV-winning designer, realtor, co-owner of Vero Home, a Cincinnati-based design and real estate investment company. And Christina, I am super excited to have you on and have a conversation. I was talking to you a little bit before this. I've seen you on social media. I've had a lot of referrals your way. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
So you're originally from Nashville and your background is in marketing, events, nonprofits. So what is it that brought you to Cincinnati and how did you originally get into real estate?
Yeah, let's get started on the how this all happened.
Yes.
So yes, I grew up just south of Nashville and actually came up to Miami University for college. And when Colin, my husband, and I met out in California between sophomore and junior year of college, we were both working for a camp out there. We started dating long distance and then ended up getting married in 2008. And his first company placed us in Cincinnati. And it worked out because it was kind of between where I grew up and where he grew up in Columbus. And so we thought, okay, we'll be in Cincinnati for a couple of years and then we'll move in my mind, it was like, and then we'll move home to Nashville. But gosh, how did we get really at that point, I just jumped into whatever job I could find, which was marketing, here's just the junk we need to happen kind of job. And it was thrown on me. And so it was that first out of college. And we tell people that if you can work your butt off that first year or two out of college, you set yourself up for success for the long road because you learn what it takes. You learn what work ethic is. You learn how to do all the jobs that other people don't want to do and what those look like. And
Couldn't
so that
agree
was
more.
a lot of, right? It's like that work ethic is really important. And it comes into play, I think, in investing and in homes and all of that. And actually we got married with quite a bit of college debt. And so we worked really hard to do the Dave Ramsey debt snowball, pay off your debt in those first couple of years. And from there, heard about real estate from Dave Ramsey. We had friends who were flipping. And let me think about this. I went from marketing to an event planning. Actually, I worked for the Anthony Munoz Foundation here in Cincinnati, and that was where I was doing their events and managing their college internship program. And I loved that role. That was such a fun company to work for. It was really fun to be invested and involved in something that is very Cincinnati-based, with Anthony having played for the Bengals, and it was a small nonprofit. But once I had my first baby, it was there were only 3 of us on staff. And so it was going to be really difficult to go part-time, and I didn't want to work full-time with my first. And so I had the blessing of being able to stay home with her for a couple of years, but we started really looking into real estate at that point. We had bought our first house in 2010-ish. And we bought it from a contractor who had done everything. We were afraid that if we touched it, we would actually take value away from it. And so, and we didn't understand escrow and taxes. We were so young, Chris. It was ridiculous. We were young and we were inexperienced and we didn't know what we didn't know. And so suddenly we felt house poor, as the taxes changed and as we were like, oh, this is not a fun feeling. Let's buy a house that is less, let's live below our means. Again, I think we're at the tail end of paying off our debt. We didn't necessarily do it in Dave Ramsey's exact order, but that's okay. And so our second house was in an original 1964, hadn't touched it since they built it, bought it from the estate of the original owner. And that's where we learned to start renovating.
Wow.
It's what got us the bug. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a big one to take on for your first one where you're actually going to renovate it yourself. Did you or Colin, your husband, did either of you have renovation experience, or were you guys just figuring it out on the fly?
We love YouTube.
YouTube University.
Yes, exactly. I would say that I am not necessarily, I was not born handy. I don't think like that, or at least I didn't at the time. Colin does have a very like technologically oriented, like mechanically oriented. He can look at something and figure out how it works. And his dad's a mechanic. So he was just raised figuring things out. I think that there's something beautiful about that. I mean, I think he was like 14 and helping his dad like wire their basement when they partially finished it or something. So he had some experience. Actually, we had neighbors in that first house, the one that we didn't touch, and they were renovating, and Colin offered to help, and they were like, "Are you even handy?" And he was so offended. He was like, "Yes, but actually, nobody would know that because I don't want to touch my house." And so I think it was a sweet turnaround, 180 to put all of that effort in. So we learned a lot by doing things two times instead of one, or going back and fixing things, or getting started, and then actually maybe we should watch a video on how this is done. And I
Right.
didn't think that our marriage was going to survive the first bathroom renovation. It's hard.
Yes,
Um,
and it's not the first time I've heard that. You're definitely not alone there. But,
right.
what's interesting, Christina, is I actually think similar to a point that you brought up earlier, going through that hardship and figuring things out and making those mistakes, I think is kind of similar to when you come out of college and you do your first job and you're doing the stuff that people don't want to do and you're figuring things out on the fly. Not only are you learning the importance of work ethic and getting out there and taking initiative, you're also proving to yourself that you can do it, which I think is almost just as important, if not more.
Yes, 100%. I mean, I feel like I talk to new investors plenty, and the advice is like, what do I do? How do I get started? And in some ways, it's like you buy a house, because once you own it, you have to figure it out, right? And it's like, and nothing makes it less scary. It's going to be scary whether you're planning for 2 years or whether you find the one that the numbers generally work on and you're just willing to do it, because you have to like have that self-talk and that confidence of, I am the kind of person who can figure this out and
For
who can
sure.
work through problems.
And
Hmm.
that I think something beautiful about doing your first project on your own home is not that you want this, but you have permission to fail, right? Because you're going to live
Yes.
there. You're not so concerned about exactly what the numbers look like and the
Hmm.
pressure of having to have a successful investment that ends up in the black and net positive. Like if you screw up your laundry room, you just fix your laundry room and you can take 6 months to do
Exactly.
it or however long. So you do have that permission to fail it where there's just a little bit less pressure. I feel like that's the case.
Yes, 100%. Well, and truly, not to like jump ahead in your questions or anything if you have a list, but like even the fact that with interior design, I learned interior design on our flips. I learned by working within a budget, and I learned all of those mistakes of like, oh, you need a filler piece here so the drawers don't open up with that hardware and hit each other, right? Like all of those little pieces where it's like, well, it stinks. It stinks that we're gonna have to pull this out and rearrange this and spend some money or spend some time. But I felt so much more confident once clients and other investors were hiring me, because I was like, "Oh, when I screwed that up, I'm gonna remember that because it cost us 500 more dollars or another week or whatever it was. I'm not costing somebody else that." And that was, I don't think I could put my name on like a designer type of role if I hadn't experienced a lot of those frustrations and problems in our own properties first.
There's just some things you cannot learn or fully appreciate unless you go through them yourself, especially through making mistakes. I think that, we all learn that the hard way at first. So can definitely relate to
Mhm.
that. How did the first project go, Christina? What did it look like? You lived in that house, you said, right? So you and Colin were doing all the work yourself. How did it end up going? And then where did you go from there?
Yes. So if you know Cincinnati, that one was in Amberley, which is kind of a killer place to get. Like this was back in 2013 when you could still get a great deal on those areas. And we lived in that house for 5 years. So we really took our time. We did a lot in the first couple years, and then we like judged in the last two, but actually it was 2016. So we had done the majority of the work on that house and we were still living in it. And then in 16, we were like, wait, let's try this on another house. We had gotten a home equity line of credit, so we knew we could at least front some of the initial costs to purchase the house. We planned on doing the majority of the work ourselves on the first actual flip. And so I think Colin had a friend who is a realtor who took him to 28 houses. We put offers on 8 of them. and we finally got one. And actually, we have friends who we had sort of acquaintances in who we knew who had flipped or were flippers, and they also bid on the house. And so when we outbid them, they looked at us, they're like, "You totally overpaid." And we're like, "Oh no, what do we do?" But that one was in Silverton, and I think we bought it for 35, no, 55. We bought it for 55, and we turned around and put like 30-ish into it, or so, 30-ish, and like several months of just every weekend, every evening. Like this was just that, like you get done with Colin would get done with work and he'd go to the house, and I'd have a baby on my hip and I'd meet him at the house. And then I think we sold it for 100. So it's like we netted like, I don't know, it was like 10, a little less than 10, which is not much, but for your first one, and we tell people this, if you don't lose money on your first one and you've gained all of that experience, like that's a win.
100%. I'm so passionate about that. You said it perfectly. I couldn't agree more.
Right. Like you've just basically gotten a free education on something that now you can turn around and you know your numbers better and you know what you can do and what you're going to hire out. And our second one, we really did. We hired out more of it. We found people that we thought, okay, this is a good fit. It's like we're never doing hardwood floors ever, right? And we cannot do drywall. We are terrible at it. And so it's like we learned that and we figured that out. And then we made like 35 on our second one. And it's like, okay, now the bug hit. I didn't have the bug after the first one. Colin was like, we should do another one and just make sure, right? And so after
Yes.
the second one, I was like, okay, that was enough to like help me see how you could build wealth doing this, how you could like how this could change your future.
100%. And I do think it's hard. I mean, I think that's why I love these conversations so much because hopefully when people are listening to this, if they are newer, they can hear what you're saying about the first one where even if you do, even if you break even if you lose a little bit of money, you have to look
Hmm.
at that like an investment in your expertise and your experience going forward. So I'm very passionate about that. I'm glad that Colin had the foresight and wanted to continue moving on because it sounds like that second one was a great success. Now, how
Hmm.
quickly after the first one did your first official flip? Did you get into your second one? And how did you kind of build on that experience?
Right. I think we listed our first one and I was like, no, I don't ever want to do this again. That was so exhausting. That was miserable. We fought so much. And then it went under contract and like the same day we found out that a house in the same general area, like one street over, was going to sheriff's sale. And it was like, we're doing this again, aren't we?
That's how it goes.
Yeah. So I think because we had gotten it under contract and I knew we were going to make some money, I was like, okay, okay, we can do it.
Yes.
We can try it again. So it was a very quick turnaround. And then that's what it really was for the next three, gosh, that was 16. Yeah, for the next 3 years, we just consistently had one going. So it was like either we bought the next one as we were waiting to close on the one previous or within kind of a month or two of close. It was just like, okay, like let's start looking. But we were, I was home with kiddos, and Colin was working a sales job where he was often traveling a couple days a week. And so I learned a lot just by like heading to a house and FaceTiming him and being like, does this plumbing look good to you? Because I
Mm,
don't know what it's supposed to look like. We also started permitting our projects because of that. We wanted another set of eyes on the projects. And we wanted to know, like, okay, as we're building our team and our crews and our people, like we want to trust you, but we're going to trust and verify. And so there was a lot of just growing in that slow, steady way
yeah.
until 2019. Yeah.
I love hearing those little tidbits like you FaceTiming Colin when you're at the property and maybe you have a kid with you and
Yeah.
you guys are just trying to figure it out. The reason I love hearing it is because it's really easy I think to look back on our previous experience now that we kind of know a little bit more what we're doing and be like, yeah, it was really hard, but like you just got to do it. But for people who haven't been there yet, they're like, well, what does that look like to like just go do it? And to a degree they have to just figure it out themselves just like all of us did,
Mhm.
right? But just that reassurance that like Christina was figuring this out. She had to go FaceTime Colin because he was doing his full-time sales job traveling around the country and they were still flipping, maybe 1 to 2 houses a year roughly for those 3 years. Is that about right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we say, and I've heard it from a number of different people, you're gonna learn by failure, either yours or somebody that you're willing to listen to and their failure. I mean, that's how you learn. We learn through uncomfortable situations. And so I think you're exactly right. It's both. It is hearing what somebody else has done and saying, I'm going to do it the same way or different, right? Depending on how they're explaining it. And then also just having to figure out what works for you and your schedule and your life and your partnerships and all of that.
For sure. And sometimes you try to avoid a mistake that somebody else makes. And by trying to avoid that, you lead yourself into another situation where you make another mistake. And it's just
Uh-huh.
inevitable, right? But
It
anyways, I
is.
just love thinking
But
about
that
that
doesn't mean
because
you're doing it wrong. That doesn't
right.
mean you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're
Exactly.
growing. Yes.
It's absolutely inevitable. Awesome. Okay. So I could
Mhm.
talk about that forever. So I'm going to force myself to move on from that. But 2019, so you have a handful of flips down, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you guys are starting to get it figured out and you're walking right into 2020. What did that look like for you?
Mm.
How are you guys feeling? What happened?
Oh man, Chris, this is like the big pivot, right? And so we've been doing a couple houses a year at this point. So we have, 6, 7-ish, I don't know, under our belt. And I would say the year before, 2 years before is when we went from like, we're going to grab the cheapest stuff that's in stock at the box store and we're going to throw it in the house and we're going to just hope everything works out, right? To, okay, wait, what are our, like on the house number 4, I actually put some planning in. And I was like, okay, let's plan a little bit more and let's put in some cooler fixtures and finishes. And it was the first one. This was slightly before everything was sort of blowing up, but it was the first time that we had a house sell first weekend, multiple offers way over asking.
Mm,
And I was like, I think that this is the design. I really do. Because nothing else about the house was like insanely special compared to the other ones we had done. And so that's when we really got into what are some of our systems and our processes, and let's think about this. And so we're rolling into those, aspects of how do we want to do this better? What do we care about? We're not just doing this to do it. We're actually like building something out of this and building a business out of this. And at the same time, Colin is just getting completely worn out in sales. And we've got 2 kids. I'm starting to do some design work for other people on the side. I'd love for him to be home more. And and we looked at each other and we said, what would it take? Like what would it take to go full time in this? And there are a series of events that's like too much and too like lofty and big and personal to us, right? But like the camp that we had met at had this position open for the summer, and we were considering, do you take a sabbatical from work to do that? And we looked at each other and we went, if we were willing to do that, why don't we just try it? Like you're employable, don't burn any bridges, and let's like jump into this and see if we can make this work for us full time. And it was crazy. We sort of, for the first time ever, we were starting to get leads back from like people who were seeing our work and saying, hey, we've heard about this house or whatever. So it's like we had the opportunity to buy 2 houses. And a friend of ours who was a contractor was going to work for a big commercial place. And he was like, why don't you try client remodels at the same time? And I'll give you a couple that I have already quoted out. Can you
oh,
imagine
wow.
that? It was
Yeah.
literally like given to us.
Wow.
Now, I will tell you, client remodels are a whole other beast and they take a whole other skill set. And it's incredible the people who can do those and flip houses and all of that. And we did it for a little while and it was fine, but it was also like, this isn't necessarily like long term, it wasn't the best. Um, it wasn't where we wanted to take our business, but it absolutely, again, willing to walk into something new and hard and unknown and figure it out and just take the risk allowed us the opportunity for sort of some more rolling income with those clients as opposed to waiting for houses to sell. And so then we were able to have Colin quit his job. So he did that in May of 2019. And yeah, 2020 came around quick.
Wow. That is a lot at once, but that's the inflection point a lot of times, right? I mean, obviously, that's a huge
hmm
leap. It's same situation where you really just don't have a choice but to figure it out. You leave your job and it's like, all right, well, how are we going to make this work? And
hmm
on one hand, it sounds like maybe that client work was given to you, but at the same time, if you've been building up your track record and doing work and putting your name out there and making mistakes, for years and years and years, I really do just want to say definitely was earned, right? Even though it
Mm,
feels like in the moment it's like, oh, here's this great opportunity. It's like, well, what about the, 8 to 10 years before that?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And it was, we never would have known this guy without the networking, without the building relationships, without, yeah, getting into this. So you're right. It can feel like it was handed to us, but you're absolutely right. There were years of building. There was years of building to get to, what is it? Like, opportunity looks a lot like hard work wearing overalls, something like that. I butchered that quote. It's a great
No, I
quote.
love
Go
that. And
looking
there's
for it.
yes, it's good, and there's one similar to that. It's like opportunity is just problems in work clothes, or opportunity is
Hmm.
I don't know, but yes, I completely
Yeah.
agree with you. So there's
Hmm.
the next I mean, on in a very similar vein, Christina, the next thing that I'm thinking of on my list is obviously in the intro, I mentioned that you're an HGTV winning design, flipping
Yeah.
real estate professional, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, you won a competition on HGTV, right? What I want to know is I want to know all about it. I'm sure people listening do too. But how did you even go about becoming selected to compete on this show? And then tell us all about it.
Isn't that crazy? I still like, it doesn't get old to hear. I'm just gonna be honest. I like, I think I grew up watching Extreme Makeover Home Edition, and and then HGTV starts, and then and I remember when Colin and I got into flipping, we are like, that would be so cool. Right? Like, man, that's like the pinnacle. That's, all of that, whatever. We just thought that was this idea of like, that's what means you've made it or something like that. I'm not sure. And so in, I think 2018, 17, 18, sometime around when I started putting design elements into our houses, we were posting them on Instagram and we were wanting to, sell them faster. It was like, okay, let's market these houses before they actually go on market and, build some interest because they look great. And we had a production scout reach out to us on Instagram, and I think I like fell to my floor, like floor on my knees. I'm like prayed, like, I would love this, Lord, this would be the coolest thing. Can we get on HGTV? And we had a conversation with them, and they're like, "Oh, you're only doing 1 to 2 a year. Never mind." And I was like,
Oh
"No, that's
no.
such a bummer." And then we had another production scout reach out to us, like maybe a couple months later, and it was the same conversation. I was like, "I'm gathering." Like, I'm getting the picture here that they want you to be doing like 8 to 10 a year, and you need to be able to like have a whole crew come in, and it's a way more complicated process to do the sizzle reel and to get the network interested, and then they buy it, and then the production, blah 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 blah. There's like all of these steps that I was learning and realizing that's not going to fit for us because we're doing 1 or 2 a year. And this is like I said, 17, 18, even early 19. And so then in actually, COVID hits March 2020. We have a couple of client projects happening. We have a couple of flips happening. We're just literally lysoling every doorknob in sight, wearing masks and trying to get our work done. And we get another message on my Instagram, hey, would love to talk to you about a show. And I didn't respond. I was like, I'm over this. I'm tired. I'm trying to keep our business running through COVID. And like, we got 2 babies that we're homeschooling, and, you know,
No more
uh,
distractions.
yeah, exactly. None of this, right? And then a couple days later, it was like, whatever, I'll respond, right? And what he said back was, "This is a show that's already been purchased by a network, and we're just casting it." And I was like, ding, ding, ding. I'm interested, right? Like, this is
Mm.
not the same old conversation. Once again, Chris, it's that aspect of like, let's go for it and see what happens. I think that this is like
Yes.
maybe the the key of the conversation today that I didn't realize was going to happen is like, take the risk, do the thing, just say yes and see what happens. And I don't see myself naturally as a risk taker, which is funny. Collins is significantly more like apt to take a risk, but I'm learning, I'm growing in this cautious risk taker. And so we said, let's have the next conversation. And that conversation turned into a Zoom call with the actual casting director instead of just the, scout. And then that casting director said, normally we'd send somebody out to film you, but it's COVID, so we're going to do Zoom calls and you're going to tell us stories. And so we went through casting all summer. And every time we finished a Zoom, we were like, that was fun. They'll probably move on to somebody else. Whatever. Let's get back to work. you
Mm.
know, we learned a little something about the process. And then it just kept turning into another Zoom call and another phone call. And then it was like August. They were like, you're cast. And we're like, what? Wait, hold on. What does this actually mean? Like,
Awesome.
what are we getting into? And so they send us a contract an inch thick is what it felt like. I don't actually think it was, but it's like, we can paint you in any picture we want. and we can film whenever we want and we can make you look however. And we're like,
Mm.
what are we doing? So we hired an entertainment attorney to look through it for us. Hire an attorney, y'all. When you need an attorney, hire an attorney. They're not that scary. And we they wanted us to come down to Atlanta to start filming because everything was filmed in Atlanta. And we still had multiple projects that we were working on. And they're like, okay, we're going to start next month. And so, we're scrambling. Do we need to hire a project manager here? Do we need to sell our properties? How are we going to handle this? And just by the grace of God, it was like everything just kept getting pushed back and pushed back. I'm not kidding you. We finished our projects and sold and closed on our last property the day before we packed up and left for Atlanta. It just worked out.
It was
It's
meant to be.
crazy. It was meant to be. And so we drove down with our kids and a whole carload of stuff, and we stayed in an Airbnb down in Atlanta, and we filmed this show where we flipped 3 houses against 2 other teams who were also each flipping 3 houses each, right? And it was a competition for which houses you're picking and how you're designing those houses and how you're executing those projects and what your relationships look like, with your contractors and subcontractors and vendors. And there is a lot at play. It was months of filming, and we worked our tails off. And spoiler alert, we won.
That's incredible. It's incredible the timing. It's incredible how all that came to be. As a
Mm-hmm.
side note, I just never would have imagined or even thought about the fact that you had to hire an entertainment attorney, which that's just a
Right?
really cool little nugget. And I also agree with you. Always hire an attorney
Mm-hmm.
if you're
Right.
questioning anything before signing a
Mm-hmm.
contract. One of the things that, I read a little bit about the show and about your all's appearance on the show. Not a ton, but I read a little bit. And something
Mm-hmm.
that continued to come up, no surprise here, is your eye for design. One thing I really do want to get into, and I think we can maybe marry this together, and also just kind of evolve the conversation and maybe move it a little bit more towards this. But why is design so important for real estate investors? What was it on the show
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stood out to people about what you were doing? Were you doing something different? I know those are 2 questions, but let's just start with the one, right? Why is design so important for real estate investors?
Well, I can answer both questions in one answer. That I think that one of the primary, I have a couple of things that I think are so important for investors to know about interior design. But the primary one, and what I really do believe helped win us the show, is that design requires that you pull back a little bit and start planning, right? Like if you're designing, so actually in the show, behind the scenes, we get our houses, right? And then they made us stop. We could not start work on them until we had basically had a week of design, where we were planning the layouts, we were planning fixtures and finishes, we were working with like trade outs, which is like when the companies that give you discounts or whatever to put their products in the houses, right? All of that was, competitive and fast choices and moving quickly to really determine how this is going to work with our budget and our timeline in these projects. And you're doing that as an investor. You buy a house, no matter whether you're on HGTV or not, you buy a house and it's like, we've got to get this done. We got to make money on this. And the longer we hold it, the more, we're spending money every day. Right. And that is true. It is. I don't want to minimize that stress level because it can be very stressful. But those extra couple of days or weeks of effort of getting it right can save you so much time and money. Mike Tyson has a quote: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Right. And I love that because what I think design does is it says you're going to get punched in the face, but having a plan, have an interior design plan for your house allows you to know what needs to shift and what needs to change when that punch comes because it's figured out already. And so what's going to have to move around.
Mm.
And so we did that with the show. It was like, okay, we have these trade outs. Let's utilize every single one we can that's going to look good with the house, right? Colin and I we knew what we were good at. He immediately started the construction plans and the figuring out what the timeline was going to be and the budgets and working with the subcontractors on their numbers. And I jumped into, I want every fixture and finish planned out. I want to know what vanity sizes I'm using so we're plumbing in the right place the first time, right? Not just sizes, but I'm actually going to pick my vanity so I know where the plumbing goes, right? I'm going to pick my light fixtures so I know where to put those boxes or the tails of the, wires or whatever, right? And then I wanted a backup for the show. I don't do this in our flips now or for my clients now. I pick one and then we order it and it's fine, right? But in the show, if you're using something free, and if you remember in 2020, everything was taking 6 times longer to get to you, logistics were a mess. I wanted a second backup. I wanted a backup and a second backup. So I had like 3 choices for every single one that I was like, this is going to work. And it was because of that organization and that planning. It's when I started building out spreadsheets for all of our flips. And it's when I started putting together design guides. And we were filming 12 hours a day and we were jumping between houses. That's a behind the scenes thing. The show makes it look like you're flipping one at a time and we're actually flipping. And so it's like we're jumping an hour away to a different house if the tile guy calls and says, "How do you want this?" Like I needed a tile plan on site that's like, I want this tile with this grout and I want the tile laid vertically, not horizontal, And so it's like I started really communicating all of those design choices very clearly and very purposefully, and it allowed us to scale. It allowed us to do more. And so I feel that strongly. I could just literally keep talking at you. So I'm going to say like 2 other things and then you can decide if you want to jump on those or not. I think design sells houses faster and higher because people buy houses on emotion. And when they walk into a well-designed house, it looks like their Pinterest board and it's not a disappointment. And so they're willing to pay more for it, right? And I think that it allows you to scale by saying, I may not be the person for design, but I have 5 investors here locally right now who have said, I want to scale, I want to do more houses. So you're going to pick everything for me. And when I realized that, I was like, we need to get resources out there for people who can't find a designer in their city or their wherever that fit their strategy, that fit their budget. And so I started building up these design guides that are a little bit more, it's like, here's a vanity that comes in 6 sizes. So you pick the vanity that you want, and then here's a tile plan that goes with it. It's all from a big box store that you can have shipped straight to you. So I was like, let's build these out because I, I'm passionate about investors putting good products in. If you put really crummy looking products in, like, the boob lights and the gray LVP, like you guys, that's out. And it looks like you're doing cheap work if you're doing cheap fixtures. And then people don't want that house. Right. And so, like, let's get you resources for good design that doesn't break your budget and it saves you hours of picking your own selections and taking the time to run, who's been here, right? The electrician calls and they're like, I'm at the house. Where's the light? Right? Or I'm not coming until for 3 more days because I want you to have your stuff here because I don't want to be like waiting for you. I've been there. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have everything picked out. And that saves you time if you know it's coming, 2 months before. You've already decided on all of it. Then they've wired the right places. They're in and out. You've ordered everything because it's right there on the spreadsheet. It's coming from Amazon or Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever. It's easy to get stuff and it's not crazy expensive. And so I was like, let's do that. So it allows people to scale. And then it builds your reputation. When we started putting good design in, we started getting leads. People were calling us and saying, you did a beautiful house, that we saw on Instagram. And my neighbor, it just moved out and it's vacant. And I want a beautiful house across from me. Well, you want to buy that house? And so we're getting leads on houses that we never would have found otherwise because
Mm,
of our reputation getting built. And I'm like, yeah, who is building a flipping business and wants like leads to just come to them? All of us.
yes.
Right? And so it's like good design helps with that. I can't make promises, but if you're doing good work and you're making something beautiful, then people want that around them and they're going to engage with you and they're going to. So those are all of my reasons that I think
Yes.
design is really important.
So much to unpack there, and I think you laid it out really well and really nicely, and I appreciate you going through that. As a side note for anybody who's listening to this, if anything that Christina just said resonates with you or piqued your interest at all, she does have a construction planning guide. Not to spoil this for you, Christina, but
It was great.
she does have a construction planning guide that she plans on giving away to people who are interested. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but just as kind of a reward for hopping on here, giving us your time and listening to the show, she will be giving that away, which is very, very generous. So thank you for that, Christina. So
Mhm.
going back, the construction, the planning process, super important. Without having actually gone through a flip, it's really hard to understand and appreciate how difficult it truly can be if you don't have somebody who's helping you. For example, on our first flip that we ever did, and mine and Grant's, picking out the fixtures no idea what we were doing. We didn't know where to look. We didn't know what fit, what didn't. We didn't know what pieces went together, what pieces didn't go together. We didn't know what was high quality or low quality. We just knew what the
Mhm.
price was, and that's not always perfectly indicative of how high quality it is.
Correct.
And so we struggled a lot, and we spent so much time trying to figure that out that we sacrificed in other areas, which started to fall by the wayside, right? It was harder to manage our contractors and help them understand exactly what we needed because we were still trying to figure it out ourselves. Not only that, but like you said, Christina, we had our contractors reaching out to us all the time. Hey, what do you want here? And I'm like, I don't
Mhm.
know. So I'd have to drop what I was doing, spend some time doing some
Yes.
research, figure it out. I had no planning, didn't know what I was getting into, and and so I struggled because of that. Out of curiosity, you did just kind of go in, you went into detail about what it looks like for you when you go into that
Mhm.
stage. But if we zoom out, kind of like you were talking about, you do at the beginning of a project, how do people normally approach a project if they're not doing the right planning and design versus
Mhm.
how you do it? Just very high level to paint a clear picture in people's minds when they're comparing and contrasting what it looks like to just like wing it versus go in
Mhm.
there with a plan.
Yeah, so let's say you're, first, second, third time flipper, early in your experience, and you're like, okay, I've bought the house. Let's demo. And so it's like, okay, what am I changing? Right? Let's say you're gonna update the kitchen, you're gonna update the bathroom, and you pull everything out, all the old stuff, right? And then you find out, shoot, like we got to replace the plumbing because it's cast iron. I don't know. And so, you start doing the plumbing, and oh gosh, I've heard this one a million times. And then you start tiling that shower with whatever tile you've grabbed at Home Depot the day before the and not to diss on Home Depot and Lowe's. I get the vast majority of my things from the box stores still. I absolutely do, because you can see it, you can touch it, and you can easily return it. And so I, they start tiling, and then they realize, like, we're gonna put this shower head in, and the plumber goes to put it in after the tile's in and go, well, that doesn't work with that valve, right? Like the cartridge behind the tile, you didn't update.
I've done that.
So you can't do that, right? Everybody's done that. Everybody who's flipped a house has done that. You're not alone. Or you get a light fixture and a mirror, and the hard part is that you don't really know it's a problem necessarily until you're in the middle of it. Right? At the beginning, you're like, great, demo, this, that, grab your stuff, put it in. And then things really start to fall apart, like after drywall. And that's when it gets expensive to change it, right? And you're
Mhm.
bringing multiple trades back in to change things. And so it's like, I don't necessarily like, if you're just going to paint and do new flooring, like, and that house is fine, and it's, your pipes aren't bad, and your electric is updated and all of that. Like, I get it. There are those houses that you can do that, and it requires a little less planning. But if you're really doing a value add, with some updates, I think, like I said, having the cabinets like not really fit because you don't know how to put cabinets in is maddening. And then you're buying an extra cabinet and you're wasting that one, and you're pushing back your countertop people, because you didn't realize I needed cabinet hardware that doesn't stick out very far so that those would open and not get stuck on one. I mean, gosh, that's like my go-to example because I had this killer house. It looked stunning, right? And I'm like, oh no, I hope the buyers don't open all the drawers. And we ended up changing out the hardware, and it was fine. It worked, right? But it wasn't the gorgeous hardware I'd picked out first, right? And we put light fixtures in, and then realized the mirror we're going to put in like doesn't fit because the light hangs down really low and the mirror's against the glass of the light fixture. It's like all of those little details that are just maddening. And you're stopping every single time somebody calls you. They can't find anything. You haven't taken it over there yet. I mean, you nailed it with just how exhausting it is, right?
Yeah. Right.
So now here's the difference,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And so to paint a picture, I think this is great. If you don't, sorry to interrupt you, Christina, but I think
You're
this is
fine.
wonderful. Like, let's just use an example. So let's say I'm hiring you and we're
Mhm.
going into that same exact house. What does the
Mhm.
process look like for you working with me to come in there and be like, all right, let's plan all this? Like tangibly, what are the actual steps and the action items we have to take?
Right. So we schedule an initial walkthrough, and we try and schedule it as early as possible. That could be Vast majority of the time, people will bring me in either like after, if they're doing an inspection, which rarely are you with a flip, but like whatever, before closing even, or the day after closing, right? And so it's like, we got the keys, we've got access. We come, I walk it through it with you, and we're discussing scope of work, and we're discussing ARV, and we're talking about what else is sold in the neighborhood and for how much and what did it look like, and do we want to pull up pictures and know what buyer expectations are first and foremost for this area, right? We don't want to over improve. I am not going to push you to spend more money or do cooler fixtures for a house that's going to work, for $2 square foot tile. Let's stick with that, right? You're putting tile in, that's great, as opposed to leaving the junky old stuff or whatever. I don't know. So we're talking through scope of work and discussing where does it make sense to put in maybe cohesive flooring throughout instead of leaving, that old LVP in that room and that carpet in that room and that tile in that kitchen or whatever, right? So it's like we're talking through some of the things that really do add the value. Oftentimes I'm encouraging people not to do a few things because maybe they're thinking this would just look so much better. I'm like, actually, by the time you do this, this, and this, you don't need to do that. Right? And so we're talking through scope of work. We take measurements. I take measurements of the bathrooms, the kitchens. I mean, I want to know where every window is. I want to know how big your trim is around that window, or whether it's a drywall return, where every doorway is. If we're opening walls, where are we stopping the opening? Is it load bearing or not? If it's load bearing, are we doing a recessed beam? Like, I want to know where, so that we know where we can put light fixtures, so that we know where we can put cabinetry, so we know how big our vanity can be. If you have a door that opens into the bathroom, a 36-inch vanity may fit, and then a 42-inch vanity may fit. And it's like, let's put the 42-inch vanity, but it has to be like only 18 inches deep instead of 22, because then that door will hit it, right? It's like those little details of really paying attention to which way do doors open. It's really getting a holistic picture of the house and what's going to fit in it. So we do all of our measuring. It's like, if you're hiring me, I want on that spreadsheet that I'm giving you real square footage, right? We're not going to guess. We're going to know that for a 5x8 bathroom, you need about 40 square feet of tile, right? Because we pull out what the shower or the bathtub tile is, and that ends up being about your overage. But we check, I ask, if you're using the same tile installer, does he want 10% overage on his tile or 15% overage? Because that can save you money if it's not, right? Or if he needs 15%, then maybe I'm picking a tile that's slightly less expensive for you. So those are the things that we're starting to work together on, is all of our measurements and determining, okay, 36-inch vanity, this cabinet plan. We're talking about your vendors and who you use and all of that. And then I start a spreadsheet, and it is like, this is every fixture and finish that you will need for this house, from your floor and your paint color to your vanities, your light fixtures, your mirrors, your toilet paper holders, your, not just your grout for your tile, but also like, what edging are you using, right? Your metal edging. We don't want like the crummy caulk line afterwards because you forgot to put the edging in. That looks cheap, and then people don't want the house. They start to pick it apart, right? Your exhaust fans, your doorknobs, and if you're switching your doorknobs, are you switching your hinges? And we're talking about all of that scope of work, right?
Yes.
And for some people, it's not that in depth. It's not that big of a renovation, but for others, like, we want it to look killer
Yes.
because, because your ARV has the potential to be so much higher.
And this list
And
that you're
then,
going through, yeah,
yeah.
sorry, this list that you're going through, it's like it's just endless, right? Because there are
Mhm,
so many details that go into a house. And that's
mhm,
exactly kind of what I think you and I are both getting at is when you're first starting, or even if you've been doing this for a long time, maybe you just are so used to the way that you're doing it that you're like, yeah, this is how it goes. And it's like very tiring and it's hard and I can do 5 a year or whatever it might be
mm,
because you're spending so much time on these details and you're getting surprised because
yeah.
it's so easy to forget. You don't have a spreadsheet that lists everything you need to cover if it's a full renovation. So these details, I'm super impressed with you to be able to name them off the top of your head. And honestly, just the job that you do, I personally, I've tried to do it. I'm not good at it. So I'm very glad that people like you exist. But I think just exactly what you're going through right here is exactly the reason why the design process, well, one of the reasons why it's so important,
Mhm,
because there's just so much that you could potentially overlook when you're flipping a house or when you're
mhm,
renovating your own home or when you're,
mhm.
fixing up a property to even to list it as a rental. It's just there's so much that goes into it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think here's the pivotal part for that scaling piece, or for the people who really want to start like pulling out. I talked to an investor yesterday. He said, my absolute goal would be that the realtor brings me the house, right? That you and the contractor meet there. I give y'all kind of general overall budget numbers, and like we do the whole process, and I don't ever have to step foot in the house after I've seen it until I'm about to sell it. And I was like, that's killer. I love that. You need a really good team to be able to do that,
Yes.
right? Like absolutely,
Yes.
you need good systems and good processes and good communication, but you can 100% get there. And here's what's going to happen. As the designer, I don't want that contractor calling me. I'm not charging the investor enough to take 17 million phone calls a day from the contractor. So
Right.
I need to communicate my design plan exceptionally well. And so that's what happens is I create the design guide, and then we build out basically pages for each space where it's like the kitchen plan looks like this, and these are the fixtures and finishes going in it, right? And they look like this, and this is the name of it, and this is how tall it is, and this is the pattern of the tile,
Right.
right? And so it's like I have that in a spreadsheet, but I also have it on the page. And this is what the vanity, mirror, and light fixture should look like,
All together.
right? With
Yes.
the measurements next to the picture of that vanity. And then on the next page, I have like printed out the specs of that vanity so the plumber can see the back of it so they know exactly where to plumb it. My favorite story that Colin loves to share is once I started doing these design guides for the flips, like he'd be walking through the house checking something, and somebody would be like, hey, what goes here? Or what are we doing? He's like, did you check the design guide? Right? Like he wouldn't answer the question. He was training everybody. Look in the book,
Yeah.
look in the book, look in the book. And so we would print one, like I'd create these, I'd print them out, we'd put them in page protectors in a binder. And on the front page of the binder, it says, do not remove from site. Do not take this. It stays on site, right? And then we print out a second copy, and the kitchen page would get blue taped to the kitchen wall, and the bathroom page would get blue taped to the bathroom wall. And it was like,
Mm,
okay, go find the book if the page gets pulled down, but everything should be right there for you. We are easily communicating this, and we are saving ourselves dozens of phone calls.
for sure. So I have some quick fire questions for you that
Yes.
just come up as I'm thinking about this. So we'll go through these. We'll just again rapid fire. So
Mhm.
how long does it typically take to get through the planning phase? When you get into a house, first time you step foot in there, how long does it typically take for you to get your design plans finished?
Depends on how many projects I'm working on at a time, right? Like I can turn around a design in about a week, depending on kind of how high end we're going. But for the average, like under 350 ARV, 3 bed, 2 bath, right? Like I can do a week or two if we're not doing, like, you're not needing me to do like a crazy amount of drawings. Drawings start to
Yes.
really like, and some of that depends on like, is it a cabinet company that I'm familiar with? Is it so it's like one of the things that I started doing is like I do these custom designs, right? But then I also have started offering just a guide where it's like, here's the spreadsheet, here's the guide. You determine, I have 6 light fixtures that all look really good together, and you determine which one goes in the entryway, which one goes in the bedroom. Because it's like, if you don't have time to wait for me and you don't need a ton of drawings, you can bust through this. And it's like, that's a lot cheaper than waiting for me to do your customized design, right?
For sure.
And so I think that's a big thing I have for people is like, there are 3 ways to use interior design. You can hire an interior designer to do custom work. You can do like an investor design package, the way like that I'm talking about. That's you're putting a tiny bit of work into like picking the things, but really it's like whose wife loves to have the paint deck thrown at them and say, I need paint colors picked in 2 hours before the painters, go to the paint store. Nobody. But if you hand her a guide and you say, will you help me pick out from these pretty light fixtures and from these 2 or 3 paint options? She's going to be like, sure. Right. This is fun. This feels like HGTV. Right. And so I think I was like, okay, so then there's the option. The third option is that there are a lot of free resources. You can go to ProSource or Floor and Decor or wherever and utilize the designers that are there. It
Mm,
just still takes more time because they're not necessarily, they're like helping you with the one area that they're helping you with. And then you're still trying to figure out how to make that area work with the other area. And does it feel cohesive? And it's still your time, right?
yes.
Good resources. If you do not have the budget, like utilize the free resources. But if you can allocate, just a small portion of your budget to other design, I'm like, go for it. Please do. It will come back to you, in whatever, 3x, 4x, 5x, whatever.
For sure.
I think the ROI is worth it.
Yes.
I really do. I feel strongly about that. Or else I wouldn't have spent so much time like learning it and figuring it out and all of that. And so I think I may have like run down a rabbit hole. I don't remember the original
No,
question,
that's
Chris.
okay. No, and it answered a good question, right? Because there's different options. And the answer to all these questions
Yes.
is going to be it depends, right? Like that's
Yes.
the
How
number one
long it
answer in
takes.
real
Yes.
estate, always, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
1 to 2 weeks, depending upon how much they're asking of you, depending upon what they're putting on your plate, so on and so forth. Every project will be different, but you can get the design, you can get the plans done in roughly 1 to 2 weeks on average.
Yeah, generally, I mean, right now I can't because I've got like 6 new houses, and so I
Sure.
thought and it's like and honestly, it's like you pay for how quick you need things,
For
don't you,
sure.
right? Like your plumber
Yes.
says, "This is gonna be a $2,000 job," or if you want me there tomorrow, it's 2,500, you know?
Exactly. Yes.
So there's some of that where it's like, okay, well, we're prioritizing people's timelines and their budgets, these next 2 to 3 weeks.
Right.
But,
Mhm.
you figure out your team and who does the best work for you and how it works with your timing and your budget.
Yes, absolutely. And so all that is great. And I think one of the things that you mentioned that I'm really interested in is it's more of a theory question. And
Mhm,
the reason I'm interested in it is because of something that you brought up earlier. There is a stigma amongst some real estate investors about other real estate investors, but primarily among people who are not involved in real estate who think about flippers or real estate investors. And really, what's I'm hearing a lot as of, really since COVID, but I'm sure
mhm,
it existed before then too, is people are putting in boring designs and everything is becoming quote unquote commercialized. And we're
mhm,
losing the character because we're
mhm,
prioritizing budgets. Now, there are competing arguments here, and I truly, genuinely can see almost every single side. So I don't think that we're talking about right or wrong here. I just want to preface that.
mhm,
I don't know if Christina feels that way, but that's how I feel. And so my question here, Christina, is let's think about the people who are running, maybe they're running larger flipping operations. We have clients
mhm,
who do dozens of flips every single year, and
mhm,
we know people who do 100 plus. Now, their strategy in order to keep things systematized and to get into one and to the next, and they're doing, maybe 15 at once, is they have templates
mhm.
and they have maybe two templates. One template for less than 500,000
Yep.
and one template for more than 500,000. Maybe it's 450, maybe it's 400, whatever the threshold is. When you get into that lower threshold, first time home buyers, 300K ARV or lower, 350 or lower,
Mhm,
whatever it might be, obviously
mhm.
you have less absolute dollars to work with, meaning you just have a tighter budget. I mean, your
Yeah,
margin might be good compared to the total proportion of the deal, but your absolute dollars, like instead of having 50,000 or 25,000, arbitrary numbers here, but
right.
to allocate to design on a $750,000 house, you have maybe 5 to 10,000. What would you recommend to people who are investing in this kind of price range, right? They're doing first time home buyers. They don't have a huge budget to allocate to design, but you know how important it is, especially after this conversation. What kind of recommendations would you give to them? How can you create a solid and maybe, high quality design on a budget when you don't have a ton of money to allocate specifically to design itself?
Absolutely. It's so possible. So here's what I say about the people who have the templates. Evaluate them regularly. And that can be like every 6 months. Even every year would like do people a favor. Like gray on gray is out, and it really has been for a year at
Yeah.
least, right? And people are still putting it in because it's on clearance. And it's like, I get that you are saving a little bit of money, but are you? Because would that house sell? Like, let's look at the numbers. If you are saving 50 cents a square foot at like best, right? When there are good medium brown options, right? Like the nice medium to light brown options, there are good options like at 250 a square foot. There are, right? If you're saving, you're putting 1,000 square feet of LVP in. So that's what my math is not great. 500? That's $500 that you're saving, right? But how much money are you spending on holding the house for the extra week or two that it takes to sell it? Is that worth it? I don't know. The stress of having, like, more houses are sitting. We need them to pop and to go and to be like, people want to buy a house, but they don't want to look at it and go, I don't like the way it looks and it feels cheap. And like, and that, like that you know what I say, you know what I mean when I say boob light, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody knows what those are
Yes,
now.
for
Everybody
sure.
knows what they are.
I grew up with those
Right.
all over my house, so I'm
Yes,
very sensitive to
yes,
this.
right, and it's like, it's what, 25 bucks, in stock, sometimes less than that, 20? Well, you can get just as good a one. A slimline black LED 3000K, 12-inch, covers the whole, like, still looks good for 20 bucks on Amazon, or a two-pack for like 35 sometimes, right? So it's just like, I think that there's a level of just, will you reevaluate your template on a regular basis and say, are we still offering a product that buyers want? And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not saying that you have to put in a $300 chandelier. It's like, but find the, like, you know, and honestly, and here's the other thing I kind of feel passionate about is, like, have like two or three, like, work with a designer one time in your area to say, here's like a slightly more modern option, a slightly more transitional option. Like, just have a couple of, like, work with a designer on your templates and pay a one-time consult fee, and then you've got something really good, and then, like, pay a consultation just to reevaluate it the next year, right? Like,
Mm,
we do not have to just stay stuck in the things we've been doing because we were doing them, because eventually they do stop working. It's like a workout. If you do the same workout over and over and over again, you're not actually going to end up building any muscle anymore. Like, and we're not growing, and we're not actually, like, building our cardiovascular health. We're just sort of like there, and our body
yeah,
gets used to it. So it's like, let's change it up just a little bit here and there and stay current and offer something. And then realtors want to sell it, right? Buyers want to buy it. It goes
yeah,
faster. You get that money quicker. There's the ROI is worth it. It's there. I'm not
yeah.
saying you have to spend hundreds. You just need to be willing to, like, evaluate.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like just from a very, like, simple perspective here, just be intentional about it. Don't do what is just the cheapest, thinking that you're gonna end up making a little bit more money. Think about what kind of end product you're going to have
Hmm.
and what the market currently wants. Now, I have just a couple more questions as we wrap it up here, Christina. And one of
Hmm.
these is a follow up to the one that we just talked about. Let's say we are talking to somebody who's literally just doing, it's maybe their third flip or they're just
Hmm.
starting out and they're doing a lower price point flip because that's what fits for them. Where
Yep.
can they go? Obviously, the best answer here, at least in my opinion, is call Christina or call a designer and have them help
Yes.
you. But let's say they don't do that. What kind of resources can people utilize online, or where can they go to figure out what is in style and what's not? Because if you're not an investor doing this all the time, maybe you do have good taste, but you don't see this every day like you and I do, right? So you might have a
Right.
harder time.
Yeah. Follow a couple people on Instagram. Like, it's not hard. Follow me on Instagram. I'll show you what's selling, right? Like, I really want to do a little bit more of that, like stories of things that are great. Like, there are a number of people. I know there are other flippers here locally in Cincinnati, across. I mean, I follow a number of different people who are building their flipping businesses. Like, what are they putting in? I'm the queen of dupes, which is like a cheaper duplicate. Right. So it's like,
Mm,
if I see a killer light on Rejuvenation, which is $3,000 for this light fixture, you better believe I'm going to get on Amazon and see if I can find something similar to put in my next, like, renovation that is a $120 light that looks like that $3,000 light. And then somebody's going to walk in and go, because of Instagram and because of Pinterest and because of how fast trends get spread around, like, I bet you anything you have a friend who likes design who would send you, screenshots of their Pinterest pages and what's cool, right?
mm,
Or you have people you can follow on Instagram, or your wife or your little sister or someone can literally scroll for you and show you pictures. It is everywhere, right? Like,
yeah.
design really is. But you just, again, I think a lot of the theme of this is, like, there's just some intentionality of getting out of your comfort zone and saying, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna, like, have that kind of person in the background so I see it every once in a while, right? I think that there are plenty of resources. You just gotta go. It's just like everything else is flipping. You just gotta go find it. Just figure it out. You can do it.
Yes. Yes, couldn't agree more. Now, as a kind of a wrap up note here, I am in the market. I'm moving apartments. I'll probably buy a house in maybe a year and a half. I'm not in a
Yeah.
huge rush, but I'm moving apartments and I've lived somewhere very affordable for a few years now and I'm looking for something that I just feel a little bit more comfortable in. So I've been shopping for a little while
Mhm.
and it's one thing to have this conversation and to hear it. It's another thing to actually be the buyer, be the person in the
Yeah.
market for a new home. Now, I'm not looking for a new home right now, but I think it's very applicable. I'm walking into some of these places that are trying to charge me, $1,800 a month, $2,000 a month, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I am it's little things that's hanging me up and making me walk the other way. It's how the light feels in the room. Like, I just feel like I'm stressed in this kitchen and I don't know why. And then I look up at the light and I'm like, oh, maybe it's the light. Or maybe I go into the
Yeah.
bathroom and it's really dark and, it's got a weird kind of like door on it. I don't know, just like little things. But there's also stuff just about accessibility. Like one of them, I had to climb up this really steep staircase that was narrow.
Mm-hmm.
My main point in saying this is that I would not make a six-figure decision if I didn't feel really, really good about it. And I think that's the key thing that you mentioned, and I just want to reiterate for everybody is it really
Mm-hmm.
is an emotional decision. My main criteria is not like I need it to be this many square feet and I need it to be this, this, this. It's like, how do I feel when I walk in here? And I can't really explain that, but I think most of it, as you've laid out very well here, is the design. And we are in a market, we've been very spoiled with COVID and ever
Mm-hmm.
since COVID, right? We've been very spoiled with how the market is, low demand. So as investors, we sell houses really quickly. If we think back to 2017, 2018, when the average days on market was like 40, it's not as
Mm-hmm.
comfortable as getting multiple offers the first weekend you list it and then having it under contract, on Saturday or Sunday. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit different. It's going to be more competitive. And if you don't do the little things, like you've talked about a lot here, Christina, to help people feel better when they walk into your home and to stand out a little bit from the other houses on the market, you're probably going to feel that pain. And if you have a private loan on your property, you're going to be paying a private loan a little bit longer. Even if you have
Yeah.
a bank loan, or even if it's cash, no matter what, time is money. And so I can't think
Mm-hmm.
of a more timely point to have this conversation as we're in October now, we're going into the slower season in real estate. We are seeing houses sit a little bit longer. Maybe we're kind of seeing somewhat of an adjustment. I just can't think of a time, I can't think of a time more valuable to focus more on design. Not that it's not valuable all the time, but certainly nowadays. So, with that in mind, where can people go to find you if they do want to start a conversation and they're taking this to heart and they actually are going to,
Mm-hmm.
start focusing a little bit more on design? How can people get in touch with you?
Thanks for asking. Okay, so first thing is, one of the parts of planning that has worked really well for us is that we put, when possible, at the beginning of a project, once I've picked everything, I've sort of started that, like, communicating the design guide, having some pictures of what I've picked. We get as many people in our subcontractor crew together as possible. We bring donuts and coffee and try and find a time that works for everybody. And then we walk through the house together and say, this is the plan, right? It makes it go so much more smoothly. This is the book. This is what we're using. Everything we walk through it. It's like it helps for the plumber to know the electrician. So I've put together like a how to run that bid meeting. So how to just the construction timeline. So many people get into this and they're like, when is installation? Do we do that before or after HVAC? Do we like
Yes.
what's the order of operations? So I have a construction timeline of what order you go in. And an example of one of our just tracking spreadsheets for the scope and schedule of a project. It doesn't necessarily include a list of the design elements because that is individual for each house, but just, a basic spreadsheet that you could, copy and paste and edit for, what works for you. So I put all of that together and that's going to be, are you going to be able to put that in your show notes?
Yeah,
Is that the
absolutely.
plan? Okay.
Yep.
So Chris is going to put that in the show notes. So you can click on that. Yes, you are opting into my email list when you click on that, but unsubscribe if what I have to say is not bringing you value. It does not hurt my feelings in the slightest. I want you to get what works for you. And so there is that. And that has my email address on it. So you can email me, Christina at verohome.com. That's verohomecincY.com, Christina. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Vero Home Design. I'm hit or miss on how active I am on there, depending on how many projects I'm working on, but I want to be more active, and you can DM me there as well.
Cincy is the only acceptable way to spell Cincy, and
Amen.
I will advocate for following Christina on Instagram. It's been one of the best follows I've made all year. So couldn't
Thanks.
encourage you to do that enough. Christina, this has been absolutely wonderful, super valuable, super entertaining. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Chris. It's been so fun. I really appreciate you.
All right, that's all we have, everybody. If you found this conversation helpful, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and check us out at sharpercapital.com. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Christina or the Sharper Capital team using the contact info below. And in this episode, definitely download Christina's construction planning guide. I couldn't encourage you to do that enough. Appreciate you listening, and we'll see you in the next one.